right. We're gonna give it. Um, we'll give it just a few more seconds here. So folks chime in again. Let us know where you are, and even if feel free to drop your LinkedIn to the chat uh, to let people know who you are, and then we'll get started. All right. With that, let's get going. So we're at the Avoid Churn Retention with Precision workshop, right? And we want to talk about how we are going to connect with our customers and keep our customers our customers. But before we do, I want to start with some ground rules. And these ground rules are help us keep this from being a one-way conversation, right? This is a workshop. I'm going to learn from you, you're going to learn from me, and by the end of this, we'll have some new ideas together. So to help facilitate that, a couple of rules. One, make sure you're muted by default if you're joining us on Zoom. Use reactions. So if something makes you happy, show me. If something makes you sad, let me know. If you need me to slow down or speed up, please leverage those reactions. They are there to help guide me, help you. Be prepared. So take a second now, if you need to grab your notepad, some water, or anything else you need in order to take notes, and use the chat. Right? The chat is where you will put your workshop answers. Right, there are going to be a few exercises today, and it's also a way to communicate with me. And yes, the slides will be shared later, as well as this recording. So fear not. If you are wondering if you're going to be able to look at this again or ask questions based on the slides, you will get these after this presentation. And of course, they are also going to be available on LinkedIn. The video is going to be available on LinkedIn and YouTube. You may ask yourself, what about questions? How are we going to deal with questions? Well, for questions, you can wait for the QA section, which will come at the end of this workshop. You could use a chat. And as we've already seen, right, if you put in a question, I'll get to it. And then 3, there's a feedback form at the end. So if you fill out the feedback form and you ask a question there, you will get a response from me later, right? Maybe you have a private question or you want to give more context. There we go. With that said, let's jump in. If I want you to leave with one concept about avoiding churn and retention, is really the precision word. The more specific we are, the better we serve our customers. That specificity is going to guide our response. If we know who our customer is, if we know what we can do to facilitate their request, and if we know what is possible from the team that we're working with, the better we are at serving that customer. Why are we here today? Well, we're talking about user drop off. And I want to make sure that when we talk about user drop off, we are talking about it in the specific context, because there are multiple contexts for user drop off. Let's define it first. User drop off is when users who are active users or customers just stop coming to your platform, stop using your tool. Now, 3 contexts that I want to lay out here, 2 of which are contexts that there's nothing really you can do. So one is sometimes the user doesn't need it anymore. For example, if I'm using a resume service, once I get a job, I'll stop using the resume service. There's no feature that you can build that'll get me back into the resume service until I'm back on the job market. Similarly, if I am selling an eSIM, once I leave that country, I don't need the eSIM anymore. Right? There's no feature that an eSIM can do when I'm using my own SIM in my own country. Right? It's not really for me. So Uh, we don't want to confuse users who don't need something anymore as users that we can stop from drop off. Next is there is a another force. Maybe there's a tool, maybe there's a regulatory change that stops me from using that tool. This is why it's important for us as product people to understand the context and the world that we're in. If you build something where there is a risk of compliance or there's a risk around regulation, sometimes people will stop and they'll just stop. Another side of that is sometimes people become insolvent. Sometimes businesses fail. Again, there's nothing you can do, or at least in what we're talking about, right? It's not about specificity, it's about change. Either you go change your product to go match regulations or you get out of that market. And if somebody's business fails, it fails. There's no reason to keep working that angle. But with those two forces laid out, there's a context in which we fail. We don't have a clear understanding of our customer and they leave and go somewhere else. This is what we're going to be talking about today. How do we stop our customers from leaving? And really, the way that we're going to do that is to talk about and discover more specificity in our work. Fixing drop off is all about finding specificity. Now, to help us do this, we're going to use a company called Bobco, which is an amalgamation of companies that I've worked with in the past. You are going to be a product manager or a designer at Bobco that is working on this user drop-off problem. Bobco sells pet supplies, and the problem now is they have a high abandonment rate, which means people visit the website, they add things to their cart, and they just don't get over to the payment, right? If they're visiting and adding things to a cart, you can be sure that they have an intent to buy. But since they're not paying, right, there's something wrong. And it's probably a failure from our end, right? Sometimes we fail. It's not having a clear understanding of our customer. Fixing drop off is finding that specificity. Now, where does that specificity come from? Well, one, it's about knowing who your customer is, who your customer is. Next is to know the problems that you're trying to solve. What is the problem? And then you have to know your operations. Can we accomplish this? Is this a business in which we will be successful? Specificity brings better stories, opportunities, and prioritization. If you find yourself having trouble with stories, well, the who section is going to be super helpful for you. If you find yourself wondering what the opportunities are, well, our what section is going to help align that for you. And if you have trouble with prioritization, our can section is going to help with that. And if you can't tell, we're going to have 3 sections of this workshop: who, what, and can. That is going to help us find that specificity for our customer. Let's get to it. Knowing your customer. Who? Who's the person that we serve? Now, a lot of companies that I've worked with in the past start off with saying everyone is their customer. But similarly to sports, when you have 2 quarterbacks or 2 pitchers, if you have 2 of them, you have none of them. If you have everyone as your customer, you have no customers. Because if you aren't able to specify who your customer is, how could you find any specificity? And so in order for us to get closer to that specificity, we want to ask a few questions. Start with the important one. Who are they? What's important to the customer right now? How and why they engage your website? If you've heard of problems or jobs to be done, right? This is a big core part of it. They're coming to your website or your app for a reason. There's a job that they need to get done for them. And that's really going to be based on who they are. So if you can answer that question, you can figure out their job. What do they want, right? As I just mentioned, the job thing. When do they have that problem? Sometimes context is really important. You want to get as specific as possible. And so if you understand when a problem is happening, you have an opportunity to intervene in specific moments. Right? That's going to be far more likely to help your customer get over their hump. And then lastly, you want to ask what's scary to the customer. What is the pain that they're trying to avoid? What's the nightmare scenario? You're going to find these out by talking to your customer on a regular basis. Ash Mayura's problem interview template is a great tool to use in order to understand who your customer is and to ask these types of questions. But once you ask these types of questions, you want to create a persona. And generally, a persona is going to have these three components. Give them a name. Names help us rally behind a concept or all of this data, right? Which one is easier to remember? Hey, John, we want to work on John's problem today. Or we want to work on 35 to 42-year-old male based in Boston. Right? It's a lot easier to say John. So give them a name. You want to define a job to be done. Again, what do they want? What are they here for? And then you want to figure out what that person is scared of. What is the fear that's driving their need to be here? You do this by, again, talking to customers, getting in front of your customers on a regular basis is super important to understanding who they are. And so if you don't have a regular cadence in talking to your customers even before issues start, now is the time to get in front of your customers, try to do it once a sprint, and just 3 to 5 people. What's going on? What are they scared of? What problem do you help them solve? You can also bring in data analytics. And so data analysis is super helpful. If you combine that with the story, you'll be able to get a good understanding of who your customer is alongside with some objective data. And then you want to map your customer journey. If you haven't done customer journey mapping, look that up after this workshop. It's a great tool to help understand why your customer is here, what actions they take, and who they are based on those actions. Knowing your customer qualifies your product. What do I mean by that? What I mean is knowing your customer lets you know if your product is on the right track or not on the right track. If you have everyone being your customer, how can you know that? You're really just shooting in the dark because some customers over here that have nothing to do with these customers over there, right? They may like something, they may not like something, but both of them are churning, but you don't know which one to focus or where to focus or how to focus. Being decisive on who your customer is and then making it a point to serve those customers first qualifies your product. Make sure you know that your product is quality to that customer. And so in Bobco's case, we have a pet owner named Eric. And Eric is looking to buy things for his dog digitally. Why? Because Eric is a traveler. Eric likes to travel the world, and he doesn't like to be, he doesn't like to have to go find a pet store wherever he is. And the thing that scares him the most is being stuck with a bill, right? He might buy something that may not work, and he doesn't want to be stuck with having to leave something. He'd like a clear return policy, something that facilitates him as a traveler. And so whenever you're working on something or whenever you're looking at Dropoff, if you had something like this in front of you, it helps you determine if something is worth working on or not. And so we're going to go into our first exercise. You're going to write a quick persona of your customer. So think of a customer for a place you have worked for or a place you have worked in the past. Write what they want from you and what they fear, and think about ways in which you can learn more about the customer after the workshop, right? If you can't fill this out with confidence, really focus on that last piece. Think about ways where you can fill in the gaps, ways you can fill in the information about this customer, or questions you can ask your leadership about focusing uh, on a ideal customer profile. What they call an ideal customer profile. All right, so you have 5 minutes. Hop in the chat, type some answers, and I will see you in a bit. I'll give folks another minute or so to get their answers in. So please go ahead and get those answers in before we move forward. All right. Some of these answers are coming on in. Fantastic. All right. Okay. So remember, when you're thinking about who, it's always a constant quest to figure out more and more and understand your customer more and more. Um, One of my favorite books to uh, get better at this is Product Research Rules. And uh, I highly recommend picking this book up. It's like a encyclopedia for talking to your customers. And so you can in there you can find tips, tricks. If you're nervous about how to do this, it'll basically walk you through. Another book that I enjoy is Talking to Humans. Same thing, right? I recommend getting both of these books together and just kind of sitting down and learning about something and trying it with your customers directly. This is a skill that you'll get better at with time. And if you want to get in front of your churn problem, and if you want to get in front of that specificity, starting with who is super important because a clear who gives us a specific hero in our journey. And that specific hero allows us to make choices, which become really important as we start to look at the what. How do you understand your problems? When I talk about what, I mean, what's the deal? Why are they leaving? What's the issue here? And for you to understand that, you're going to need a couple of questions to answer, right? How does your product work? What's your ideal product? How's it supposed to work? When you built it, it's supposed to do A, B, and C. What is it? And is there an issue with A, B, or C, or maybe A and B, or maybe B and C, or maybe A, B, and C? But you got to figure out what is the situation in which the product works and when is it not working? How is it not working? Then you have to add on the idea of the who and what is the expectation that they have about the product. The way your product works and their expectations could be the same or they could be vastly different. It depends on understanding your customer, looking at your marketing, uh, and making sure that the reason that you built this is in line with how they operate and what they do. And so, in the middle of that, if you understand what's your ideal state, where your product is, and what your customer outcomes are, the frustrations of the customer should become apparent. And again, this is why we start with who, because if you have a specific hero, you can now target those frustrations in a precise way, right? If there are bugs, what are the bugs that affect your hero, right? Allows you to start to clarify where you need to go next. So, run through your app every once in a while. Take some time and just run through your app. What is your app? Ask yourself these questions. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? What are people saying about your product? Go check out Reddit. Reddit's a great place to understand what people are saying. Twitter, social, Facebook. Go see who and what do you hear? What's going on? Next is what do you see? Is there anything visibly wrong? Take a minute and just go through the app every once in a while. Just create a test user account if you're working on a SaaS app or and just go through the process. Just run through it every once in a while, just to see if anything just screams at you. Um, Also, check in with other teams. Right? If you have a customer success team, again, they're hearing about bugs all day. They can tell you what's wrong. If you don't know what's wrong, they will gladly tell you what's wrong because there are people talking to them constantly about what's wrong and what they see. And then what you feel. Based on your research, based on talking to those customers, you're going to get a feeling on how you can close that gap between the ideal outcome and the outcome that you have. Some great ways to do it. I mentioned talking to customer support. Customer support should be your friends. If you are working in a big enough organization, after this meeting, just find a person or find the customer support team, or if they have office hours, just go and check it out, right? Just go talk to them. You're going to get a lot of value out of the conversation. Watch the customer using the product. If you have access to tools that allow you to watch your customers and see their frustrations, like Full Story, for example, go ahead and just watch people. Watch them make mistakes or go around awkwardly. You're going to find those sore spots. And then there's also service blueprinting. Right? And service blueprinting is a technique where you take a look at what's happening in the front of the house and the back of the house. And you, what by front of the house and back of the house, I mean, in front of the house, what are the customers doing? In the back of the house is what is happening underneath from a technical standpoint. And you can find where the issues are from there. Right? It's a good map for you to start. Because you're doing two things, right? You're building evidence and you're building your taste. And between taste and evidence, you have opportunities. Now, if you have specificity with that taste and specificity with that evidence, that is how you become a strategic leader. That is how you become a unique product in a world full of products. So let's go back to Eric. Now, Eric has a couple of frustrations. And so Eric is frustrated by the unclear shipping costs, right? He didn't know what he was getting into. He felt this was an app for people who travel. And so why are the shipping costs, A, a surprise, and B, not factored into the price in general, right? It's becoming sticker shock. Eric is surprised also the fact that Eric wants to use a card, but there's only Apple Pay, right? And it limits his options as a traveler because sometimes he uses a different card depending on what country he's in or what state he's in. And so the limited pay options stop him. And then lastly, there's an unclear return policy. He tried to read it. It seems very complicated, and so he just quit. And that goes back to his biggest fear. He doesn't want to be stuck with something that's not useful. He's happy to turn it back in, but if you don't give him the opportunity, he's going to be like, right? And all of a sudden he's out. And so I want you to do the same. I want you to think about the users, right? Anita, Latifa, Sarah, some of the users that you've all talked about, Lawrence, in the chat here, and what problems they have. Write the source or take a guess, and then think about the changes you can make to tackle it. You got 5 minutes. I will see you in a bit. just about there. So I'll give folks an extra 30 seconds here to drop their answers in the chat. All right. If you haven't dropped your answer in, feel free to continue to drop it as we move forward here. I'd like to see what you think. And even if it's not done, go ahead and drop it anyway. So, it might spur a question as we get to Q&A. One of my favorite books on the subject is Teresa Torres's Continuous Discovery Habits. What's great about this book is it's not only about teaching you how, it also tells you, right in the name, that it's continuous. Right, you're building a muscle on discovering these problems and tackling them with opportunity. So, by all means, pick it up if you want to get better at the what, because a clear what gives us a specific challenge in our journey. And so, when you think about that clear what and that specific challenge, that gives you a direction to head into. And with that specificity, you're able to really take on a problem clear-eyed. But in order to do that, you got to know your operations, right? We live in a world with limits. There's gravity, there's physics, and your team has limits. Very helpful to ask, can you do it? If the answer to my question requires me to build a nuclear reactor, well, as smart as I think I am, I'm not going to be able to do it, right? I might need to get out of that problem space. I may just need to go somewhere else. I may need to pivot. Likewise, everyone's working in a place of constraint. So it is worth it to understand what you can do, what you can affect, and what you can't. Ask your team, what can we do? What skills do we have? What tools do we have available? How fast can we do it? Sometimes you're working with limited time. If something is going to take 2 months, that might be fine. If it takes 2 years, it may not be fine, right? Ask yourself, how fast is it going to do? Is it going to be to create it? And then when you think about how fast it is, add slack time, right? Your projection is probably wrong. It's probably going to take longer than you think. And so it's always a good practice to add in 25% or so, right? So if I say something takes 4 months, make it 5. Give yourself some buffer time. And then ask yourself, what is the effort that the team has to take on, right? Is it high effort? Is it going to take everybody working around the clock, or is it low effort, right? We can do this in a week with 3 people working 10 minutes a day. And of course, your work is not in a vacuum. You got to ask yourself, what else is important for the team? Are there any other projects in play? Are there any other ideas that fall in line with the other big initiatives? Are we doing them? Should we be doing them? Right? Again, we work in a place of constraints. We're not going to have all the time in the world to take on what we want. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we're taking on the things that have the low effort and high value, right? Top left. Then we ask ourselves, for the things on the right, if it's high effort, is this worth doing? And then on the bottom, we want to try to avoid this stuff as much as possible. Certainly, if it's high effort, low value, uh, I would avoid that unless you are in a place where you have to do it, right? But then we're talking about the other two forms of drop off, maybe. So how can you do that? How can you figure that out? Well, talk to your team, right? You may see a theme here. Talk, talk, talk. As product people, as designers, we have to talk. We have to be communicators. What is our throughput? Meaning, how much work can we do in a set amount of time? What are our constraints? What are some things that are happening in the world that I may not know? Talk, talk, talk. Uh, you've been working on the opportunities because you have a clear persona now and a clear target. List those opportunities. What are they? What's important? And then lastly, create a source of truth. Every team needs a source of truth. Doesn't matter what that source of truth is. It could be a Confluence document, it could be a Google document, it could be a Trello board, whatever it is. But that source of truth is going to be important as you list out what are your constraints, what is your problem, who is important, right? It's going to give people an opportunity to align and prioritize their own work, which is super duper important because you only have so much time. You got to pick wisely, right? Understand what needs to be done and then do it. So in Bobco's case, they recognize that changing the payment processor is high effort, questionable value, highlighting costs is medium effort, medium value, and changing their return policy was low effort, high value. And so they focused on the change of the return policy and making that much more simple. And so I'm going to ask you the same with that problem that you have listed, with that person that you have listed. Think about your team. What's currently active? What's the priority? What's important? And whatever suggested fix that you have, is that more important than the things that are prioritized? And go ahead and write your answers in the chat. Have fun. All right. So, for those who are still writing, please, I'll give you about a minute here to get those answers in. All right. So, if you want to get better at this, leverage the Phoenix Project. Again, a fantastic read for those who want to learn about constraints and how to deal with them. Because a clear can give us a specific path in our journey. And remember, fixing drop off is all about specificity. I mentioned various tools that are there to help. We have Pendo, Full Story, Mixpanel, Google Analytics, Heap, User Pilot. These are all tools that are of various price points that you can use in order to help get that specificity that we are talking about. Uh, and before we get to Q&A, I'd love your feedback. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here. Um, and I would love to get your feedback on this presentation. Give you a couple minutes and then we'll go right into Q&A. If you have a question, now's a great time to type it into the chat, and I will get to it. can answer that question immediately. Oh, we're at the Q&A stage. Whoops. I thought I was unmuted. I guess I wasn't. We are at the Q&A stage, and if you have any questions, let me know. If not, if you finished your feedback, or you want me to answer that question you gave on feedback, feel free to get out of here. It's been a pleasure spending this hour with you today. Uh, can I show how do you use Google Analytics? Not in this short amount of time. That's a pretty big question. Uh, if you feel free to book a session with me and we can talk through. But generally, I use Google Analytics um, as a way to understand conversion rates within a product. Uh, any other questions? If not, it's all right. Well, if not, I will hopefully see you soon. Send me an email if you'd like to chat, uh, and have a great day.